For as long as I can remember, I believed that shared dreams were what kept a marriage alive. And for a while, it felt like mine was full of them. Late-night conversations about the future, lists of places we wanted to visit, and the quiet comfort of knowing we were building something together. That belief is what made our anniversary trip to Switzerland feel so special. It wasn't just a holiday, it was a symbol of us. It started one cold morning in February. My wife, Elena, walked into the kitchen with a travel brochure in her hand and a spark in her eyes I hadn't seen in months. "Luke," she said. My full name, Lucas, shortened the way she used to say it when we first started dating. "What if we finally take that trip we talked about?" I looked up from my laptop, hardly believing it. "Switzerland." She nodded excitedly. "The Alps. The lakes. The old towns. Everything. Just you and me." Back then, it felt like a doorway had opened. Things between us had been tense, small arguments, long silences, and excuses about being tired or busy. But the idea of escaping to Europe together felt like a chance to reset, to breathe again. I closed my laptop and pulled her into a hug. For the first time in months, she hugged me back with the same warmth. We spent the next few weeks planning everything. Flights from Lahore to Zurich, 2 nights in Lucerne, 3 in Interlaken, a day trip to Zermatt, and a final stop in Geneva. Every night after dinner, we sat at the dining table with our laptops side by side, comparing hotels. She liked boutique places with character. I liked clean and simple ones. We compromised on a charming lakeside hotel overlooking Lake Brienz. I still remember the way she smiled when she saw the photos. "It looks like something out of a fairy tale," she whispered. "And you'll look perfect standing there," I replied. She blushed, a reaction I hadn't seen in a while. That alone made the whole trip worth it, even before it began. As the departure date approached, I started noticing little things about Elena. She seemed distracted. Some nights she stayed awake scrolling through her phone, the screen lighting up her face in the dark. Other nights she seemed restless, walking around the house as if she were searching for something she'd misplaced. I tried to talk to her. "You okay?" I asked one night while she sat on the edge of the bed. "Yeah, just stressed," she said quickly, not meeting my eyes. "With the trip? With everything?" I didn't push. Maybe I should have. But I convinced myself that the trip would fix everything. After all, this wasn't just a vacation. It was a chance to reconnect, to remind ourselves who we were before life got complicated. I even planned a surprise for her, a private dinner cruise on Lake Lucerne. I imagined us sitting on the deck under the stars, holding hands as the mountains cast their shadows across the water. I pictured her smile, her laugh, the way she leaned her head on my shoulder when she felt safe. I kept reminding myself, this trip will bring us back. Or so I believed. A week before we were supposed to leave, Elena started waking up earlier than me. She'd make herself coffee, sit near the window, and stare outside for long stretches. When I asked what she was thinking about, she always said the same thing. Just work. Just life. Her phone buzzed more often. Sometimes she ignored it, sometimes she didn't. Once, I caught a glimpse of a name on her screen, Adrian. A European name. But I didn't think much of it. People have friends. Old classmates. Colleagues. It wasn't unusual. It wasn't suspicious. At least, that's what I told myself. 3 days before our flight, we were finalizing our packing lists. I folded my clothes neatly, double-checked our bookings, and even bought her a new camera she'd been wanting. She loved photography, especially mountains and lakes. "You're going to take the best pictures ever," I told her, handing it to her. She looked surprised, and for a moment, genuinely happy. "Lucas, thank you. Really." That night felt warm. Hopeful. It felt like we were finally moving in the right direction again. If only I knew what was coming. 2 days before the flight, she grew cold again. Distant. Fidgety. Her phone buzzed 3 times in an hour. Each time, she turned the screen away from me. That night, when I lay beside her in bed, I could feel the tension in her body. She wasn't relaxed. She wasn't leaning toward me like she used to. She was stiff, guarded. "Elena," I whispered, "is something wrong?" "No," she said quickly. I reached for her hand. She pulled it away, pretending she needed to adjust the blanket. My heart tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. The trip. The Alps. The lakes. The sunsets. Surely, everything would fall back into place. Surely, this was just stress. Surely, my wife still loved me. The night before our flight, I was awake until 2 a.m. packing the last few items, checking documents, imagining the moment we'd see the Swiss Alps for the first time. She was unusually quiet. She kept stepping out of the room to take calls. When I asked who it was, she simply said, "Just a friend from university." I didn't push. I didn't want to fight, not when we were so close to leaving. But the truth is, something in my chest felt heavy, like a warning. And I ignored it, because I wanted us to work, because I loved her more than my own pride, because I believed that a trip, a shared dream, could fix cracks I didn't want to admit were growing. By the time we went to sleep, my suitcase was by the door, neatly packed, our passports on the nightstand, and the itinerary printed out. I looked at Elena sleeping on the far side of the bed, facing away from me. I whispered into the dark, "Tomorrow's going to be good for us." But she didn't stir. She didn't move. And she didn't know that tomorrow wasn't going to save anything. It was going to destroy everything. Everything we planned. Everything we built. Everything I believed in. The trip we had dreamed of together, my last hope, was about to become the moment everything finally broke. And I had no idea. The morning of the disaster began quietly, almost peacefully. I woke up before Elena, as usual, and poured myself a cup of coffee while watching the pale sunlight creep across our bedroom walls. For a moment, everything seemed normal. The suitcases were packed, the itinerary lay neatly on the table, and I felt a small surge of hope. Maybe this trip would finally mend the tension between us. Then a single notification shattered it all. Elena's phone buzzed from the other side of the room. Normally, I wouldn't have noticed, but the screen lit up, casting a glow across the floor. I caught a glimpse of a name I hadn't expected to see again, Marco Bianchi. My heart froze. A part of me didn't want to know, didn't want to see. But I couldn't look away. The message preview read, "Are you still thinking about what we discussed?" The world around me seemed to stop. My hands tightened around my coffee mug, and a strange, cold feeling settled in my chest. Thoughts raced. What does he mean? What could she possibly be planning? I didn't touch her phone. I didn't snoop. I only stared at the screen, trying to convince myself that I was imagining things. She walked in, and everything changed. Elena walked into the kitchen, her hair messy from sleep, wrapped in a loose sweater. She smiled faintly, the same smile I had once adored, and kissed my cheek softly. But when her eyes met mine, I noticed a flicker of hesitation, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. "Good morning, Adrian," she said softly. "Morning," I replied. My voice was steady, but my heart thudded with unease. She picked up her phone casually, but the moment she realized I had noticed the notification earlier, her expression shifted. Recognition. A fleeting panic. "What's wrong?" she asked, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her calm. "Nothing. I just noticed your phone," I said cautiously. "Marco Bianchi, why is he messaging you?" Her hand tightened around the phone. "It's nothing, Adrian. Just work stuff. Don't overthink it." I could hear the faint lie in her voice, the subtle truth in her actions. Throughout the morning, Elena behaved differently. She clutched her phone like a lifeline. She kept it face down. She moved from room to room, answering messages quietly, making sure I didn't see the screen. I wanted to trust her. I needed to trust her. But something inside me refused. When I tried to talk to her, she would brush it off. "Adrian, don't make a big deal out of this. It's irrelevant." Irrelevant. That word echoed in my mind. Was it really irrelevant? Her every action that morning, the careful handling of her phone, the whispered responses, the distracted glances, told me otherwise. The message that broke everything. Later that afternoon, Elena left her phone unattended on the bed. I had been in the living room, pretending to read the itinerary again, though my mind had stopped following the words long ago. The phone vibrated, lighting up the screen. I couldn't resist. And then I saw it. "I miss you. Please don't cancel our plan. Are you sure Adrian won't notice?" My hands went cold. My vision blurred. The truth hit me harder than anything I had ever felt in my life. She wasn't stressed. She wasn't distracted by work. She wasn't just distant. She was planning to meet Marco. The trip we had dreamed of together, our last hope, was about to be ruined by her past. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. But all I could do was stand there, gripping the phone, heartbroken and frozen. Her confession, and the half-lies she offered. When Elena came back from the kitchen, she noticed me holding her phone. Her face drained of color, and she stammered, "Adrian, you went through my phone?" "I didn't," I said. "It was lying there. And I saw the messages. All of them." She tried to pull it away. "It's private." You're my wife, I said quietly, my voice shaking slightly. Nothing between us is private anymore if it destroys what we have. She sank onto the edge of the bed, holding her towel tightly. It's not what you think, she whispered. It is exactly what I think, I said. I just needed closure, she admitted. Closure. That word, so innocent on its own, sounded like a dagger in my chest. She was hiding her feelings, her intentions, and her choice behind a single word. I stared at her. With him? She flinched barely. I don't know. And in that moment, I understood everything. She didn't need closure. She didn't need to think. She had already made her choice. The quiet pain of realization. We didn't fight. There were no raised voices, no shouting matches. The silence was worse. It filled the room, heavy and suffocating. I sat on the sofa, staring at the travel folder with our tickets, itineraries, and hotel confirmations neatly stacked. Everything we had planned together, the flights, the restaurants, the sunset cruises, the gondola rides, suddenly felt meaningless. Elena sat across from me, hugging her knees. Her eyes were red from crying. Her lips trembled as she whispered, Adrian, I didn't mean for this to happen. Sometimes, meant to doesn't matter. Choices matter. Actions matter. And she had chosen Marco. The moment of acceptance. For the first time in months, I felt clarity amidst the chaos. I realized I couldn't force her to love me, couldn't compete with a past that had held her heart captive longer than I knew. I took a deep breath. I looked at the suitcase beside me. Our trip. My dream of reconnecting. It was still possible without her. That's when I decided. If she wanted him, I would take the trip anyway. If she was leaving me emotionally, I wouldn't leave myself. Sometimes a message can destroy a world. Sometimes that same message can free you from it. And this one did both. By the end of that day, I knew the trip would no longer be just a vacation. It would be my escape, my opportunity to heal, my chance to realize that life could go on, even if Elena couldn't be a part of it. Marco Bianchi had reappeared, but I was the one who would take control now. Tomorrow I would leave. Alone. And I wouldn't look back. There are moments in life when silence speaks louder than words, when a single pause can tell you everything you refuse to believe. That morning, after seeing the messages, after confronting Elena, after watching her struggle to form even one honest sentence, I realized what I had been denying for weeks. She had already chosen him, even if she didn't say it directly, even if she hadn't packed her bags, even if she still lived under the same roof as me. People don't hide what doesn't matter. People don't risk a marriage for someone they don't want. People don't make a choice like this unless their heart is already gone. And Elena's heart was gone. The moment of silent betrayal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. Elena curled up on the far side of the bed, facing away from me. The distance between us felt like an ocean, one we both knew neither of us would cross again. Around 3 a.m., I heard her phone buzz softly from the nightstand. I turned slightly, just enough to see the glow illuminating her face. She thought I was asleep. She whispered something softly into the phone. I didn't hear the words clearly, but the tone told me everything: affection, intimacy, desire. I felt my stomach twist. She wasn't speaking to a friend. She wasn't speaking to a colleague. She was speaking to Marco Bianchi. It was a quiet moment of betrayal, yet it screamed the truth louder than any fight could. Breakfast in a house that no longer felt like home. The next morning, I prepared breakfast out of habit. Tea, toast, eggs, the usual. Elena walked into the kitchen slowly, her hair tied in a messy bun, wearing a t-shirt I had bought her last year. But it didn't feel intimate anymore. It felt like she was wearing the memory of someone else. We sat in silence. The clink of cutlery and the steam from our cups were the only sounds filling the room. She barely touched her food. Her eyes kept darting toward her phone, waiting. Finally, she cleared her throat. "We need to talk," she said softly. Her favorite sentence, the one that always came before something painful. I nodded. "Go ahead." She looked down at her hands. I think we should cancel the trip." I had been expecting the words, but hearing them cut through me like a knife. "Why?" I asked quietly. She swallowed, avoiding my gaze. "I'm not in the right place emotionally." Emotionally? That's what she called it. "Because of him?" I asked. My voice was steady, but inside, my heart was breaking. She flinched. "It's complicated." "No," I said firmly. "It's not." Her lips trembled, but she couldn't meet my eyes. She was trying to soften the blow, trying to rewrite reality in a way that hurt less. But nothing could mask the truth. She wanted Marco, not me. Her half-truths wrapped in lies. Later, she came into the living room, sitting on the edge of the sofa. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from tears. "We can postpone it," she said quietly. "No, Elena," I replied calmly. "We can't." She looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" "The trip wasn't the problem. The plan wasn't the problem. We were the problem," I said. She whispered, "I'm sorry." Sometimes sorry comes too late. Sometimes sorry doesn't fix what's broken. Her apologies could not undo her choice. Every word she had spoken since the messages had been a careful dance around the truth. Every hesitation, every trembling, every sigh was proof that her heart was no longer mine. She had chosen someone else. The question that needed no answer. I gave her one last chance. One final opportunity to be honest with herself, and with me. "Are you choosing him?" I asked, my voice soft, steady, but full of quiet pain. A long silence followed. Then a whisper. "I don't know." Her words were faint, but her eyes spoke louder than any voice could. They told me everything. Yes. She had made her choice. She was leaving me emotionally, even if she remained physically. I didn't beg. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I had learned that day what many discover too late. You cannot fight for someone who has already walked away in their heart. Tears don't rebuild trust. Words don't repair betrayal. Begging doesn't bring love back. All it can do is teach you the painful truth. Some people are gone long before they leave. The end of us. By late afternoon, it was over. Not with a dramatic scene or raised voices, but with quiet acceptance. I stood in the living room, looking at our suitcases, the itinerary printed neatly on the table. Every detail of our planned trip, the flights, the hotels, the gondola rides, the sunset dinners, suddenly seemed meaningless. She sat across from me, hugging her knees. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. "Sometimes I didn't mean to doesn't matter. Actions matter. Choices matter." And hers had chosen someone else. I took a deep breath, feeling clarity amidst the heartbreak. I realized I couldn't force her to stay. I couldn't compete with a past that had her heart. But I could take control of what remained in my life. I wouldn't let this define me. I wouldn't beg for love that was already gone. I wouldn't stay silent while my life slipped away. I would leave. I would take the trip. I would do it alone. The choice that was mine. Sometimes the hardest decisions are also the most freeing. That evening, I packed my bag again, making sure everything was in order. The tickets, the itinerary, the hotel confirmations, all ready. I glanced at Elena. She was quiet, staring at her phone, still wrapped up in her own world. I realized then that I had a choice. A real choice. I could wallow in betrayal, let it destroy me. Or I could step into the life I deserved, even if it meant stepping out alone. I chose the latter. The trip was no longer about us. It was about me. About freedom. About reclaiming the life I had been giving away to someone who no longer wanted it. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt a flicker of hope. Tomorrow, I would leave for Switzerland. Alone. And I would not look back. By the time the morning of my departure arrived, I had made a choice. The world outside our window was bright with winter sunlight, but inside, my apartment felt heavy, charged with the weight of the past few days. Elena Kovacs was in the kitchen, pouring coffee, her movements mechanical, her face pale and withdrawn. She didn't glance at me as I zipped up my suitcase. For months, I had imagined leaving for this trip together, her laughter beside me on the plane, her hand in mine as we explored the Swiss Alps. But the reality was different. She had chosen someone else. Her heart belonged to Marco Bianchi, and there was no room for us anymore. I took a deep breath. This trip, which was supposed to be a celebration of us, was now my declaration of independence. My moment to reclaim my life. The moment of revelation. I walked into the living room with my bag, and Elena looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. She must have thought I was still going to beg her, still plead for her to stay. "Adrian, wait," she started. I didn't respond. I simply moved toward the door. My heart felt heavier than ever, but my mind was clear. For the first time, I realized that the life we had built together, the plans we had made, were no longer mine to share with her. She followed me, her steps hesitant. "We can still talk about this." "About the trip?" "No," I said quietly but firmly. "There's nothing left to discuss. This trip isn't about us anymore." Her eyes widened. "Not about us?" "Adrian, I stopped her with a calm I didn't know I had. It's about me. It's about what I need. And what I need is to go alone. Packing more than just bags. The taxi arrived, and I carried my suitcase down the steps. Elena watched silently from the doorway, her expression unreadable. I imagined she wanted to say something, to change my mind, to convince me that things could be different. But I had already made my decision. As I stepped outside, the crisp winter air hit me. It smelled like freedom and something terrifyingly final. I had packed not just my clothes, but months of heartache, betrayal, and disappointment. This trip was no longer about adventure. It was about healing. About reclaiming a part of myself I had lost while trying to hold on to someone who no longer wanted me. Elena finally spoke, her voice soft, almost pleading. "Adrian, why are you doing this?" I turned to her and looked into her eyes. "Because I have to. Because I deserve more than someone who's already gone. Because it's time I put myself first." She didn't answer. She couldn't. And in that silence, I felt a strange sense of relief. At the airport, a new beginning. The airport was bustling with travelers, all oblivious to the storm in my heart. I checked in, went through security, and walked toward my gate with a strange mix of apprehension and exhilaration. As I boarded the plane, I realized something profound. Leaving alone didn't feel like defeat. It felt like victory. I was reclaiming my life, stepping into a future where I controlled my happiness, where I wasn't chained to someone else's indecision. I found my seat by the window, staring out at the planes taxiing on the runway. The thought of Elena and Marco lingered, but it didn't sting as sharply anymore. I had made my decision. And nobody, not even her, could take it away from me. The first night in Switzerland. By the time I arrived in Lucerne, the sun was beginning to set over the Alps. The mountains looked more magnificent than I had imagined. Snow capped the peaks, and the lakes reflected the golden light in a way that made the world feel untouched, unbroken, and full of possibility. I checked into the boutique hotel I had reserved weeks earlier and unpacked my suitcase. Everything was quiet, yet vibrant. The city seemed alive, yet I felt at peace. For the first time since seeing the messages, I felt something like hope. I decided to take a walk along the lake before dinner. The cobbled streets and old buildings felt like a storybook, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I belonged to myself. As I walked, I thought about Elena, about how her choice had hurt me, yet freed me, about how betrayal, though painful, sometimes becomes a catalyst for personal growth. And I knew deep down that this trip, this solitary journey, was exactly what I needed. The letters I didn't send. That night, I sat in my hotel room and wrote a few letters. Not to Elena, not to Marco, not even to anyone. They were letters to myself. Letters reminding me that I was stronger than heartbreak. Letters reminding me that betrayal did not define me. Letters reminding me that my happiness depended on my choices, not on anyone else's. In the glow of the desk lamp, I felt a strange liberation. I had chosen me. I had stepped away from pain. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone else's decisions to shape my life. A decision that surprised everyone, even me. I realized that the hardest decisions are often the ones that nobody expects. My friends had assumed I would beg her to stay, that I would cancel the trip and wait. My family had assumed I would confront her endlessly, that I would remain trapped in heartbreak. Even I had assumed at some level that I would try to salvage what was already lost. But none of that happened. I chose myself. I chose to leave. I chose freedom over familiarity, adventure over despair, healing over heartbreak. And in that choice, I found strength I didn't know I had. The journey ahead. As I looked out the window at the sparkling lights of Lucerne that evening, I realized something profound. The world is bigger than any betrayal, stronger than any heartbreak, and more beautiful than any disappointment. Elena had made her choice. Marco had reappeared in her life. And I had made mine. I would explore these mountains alone. I would eat in the quiet cafes, take photographs of the lakes, walk the cobbled streets, and breathe deeply. This trip was no longer about what I had lost. It was about what I was about to gain. And that decision, hard, painful, and entirely mine, was the first step toward a life I would build for myself. The morning air in Lucerne was crisp, carrying the faint scent of snow from the surrounding Alps. I stepped out of the boutique hotel, my camera slung around my neck, and felt a strange combination of solitude and exhilaration. For the first time since the heartbreak, I felt free. Free to explore, free to breathe, free to rediscover who Adrian Muller really was without anyone else's shadows clouding my path. This was supposed to be a vacation with Elena Kovacs, the trip we had planned together with excitement and laughter. But betrayal had turned it into something entirely different, something entirely mine. And surprisingly, I found that I didn't hate it. I didn't even hate her. I simply accepted that life had changed, and it was up to me to move forward. Discovering solitude in the Alps. I wandered along the edge of Lake Lucerne, the mountains reflecting perfectly in the glassy water. Snow-capped peaks stretched endlessly, silent and majestic, a reminder that some things in life remain pure and untouchable. The serenity of the lake contrasted sharply with the storm of emotions I had carried for months. As I walked, I thought about Elena and Marco Bianchi. Their choices had hurt me, yes, but their existence no longer controlled my happiness. I began to see that sometimes people leave, not because of anything you did or didn't do, but because their hearts belong elsewhere. And in that realization, a strange peace settled over me. I stopped at a small cafe by the lake and ordered a cappuccino. I sat at a table by the window, watching boats glide across the water. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to check my phone, to wonder about Elena, or to replay conversations in my head. I simply existed. Moments of clarity. Over the next few days, I explored the charming streets of Lucerne, hiked trails leading to breathtaking viewpoints, and visited small galleries filled with centuries-old art. Each moment was a revelation. I realized that I had spent so long tied to someone else's indecision that I had forgotten how to embrace my own life. I thought about the messages I had seen, the secret whispers to Marco, the hidden excitement, the excuses. And for the first time, I felt neither anger nor betrayal. I felt clarity. Elena had chosen her path. I had chosen mine. And that choice, I realized, was more powerful than any apology, any explanation, or any regret. Meeting strangers who became teachers. One afternoon, I joined a small photography tour around the Alps. Among the group was a woman named Clara, a local photographer who had traveled across Europe capturing the soul of mountains and lakes. She noticed my camera and my quiet demeanor. "You're carrying more than just a camera, aren't you?" she asked gently. I looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes people take trips to escape, not to explore," she said. "And sometimes the escape becomes the journey you needed all along." Her words struck me. For months, I had focused on what I had lost, on Elena and what she had done, while ignoring the person I could still become. That evening, I photographed the sunset over the snow-covered peaks, capturing the fiery reflection on the lake. Each shot reminded me of something vital. Beauty exists everywhere, even in pain. And even in solitude, there is life waiting to be embraced. The turning point. By the fourth day, I had started journaling every night. I wrote about my anger, my heartbreak, my disappointments, but I also wrote about small joys. The aroma of fresh bread in a Lucerne bakery, the laughter of children playing in a square, the sound of church bells echoing through the mountains. Each entry became a meditation, a reminder that life moves forward whether you are ready or not. And slowly, I realized that the trip that had begun as an escape from betrayal was transforming into a journey of self-discovery. I understood that I didn't need Elena to validate my happiness. I didn't need Marco's absence or presence to determine my worth. I was enough on my own. An unexpected encounter. On the fifth day, I took a cable car to a high viewpoint overlooking Mount Pilatus. The snow was thick, the air cold, but the panorama was breathtaking. I stood alone, capturing images of the clouds kissing the peaks, when a fellow traveler, a young man named Sebastian, approached me. "You're taking it all in, aren't you?" he said. "I'm trying to," I replied. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "sometimes we need to be alone to really see ourselves. You can't rely on anyone else to define who you are." I nodded, realizing he had no idea how personal his words were. But it didn't matter. Sometimes wisdom comes from strangers in unexpected moments. That evening, as I descended the mountain, I felt lighter. The weight of Elena's betrayal, Marco's intrusion, and months of tension began to lift. For the first time, I felt like Adrian Muller again, the man I had been before Heartbreak, strengthened by experience and clarity. The realization. Sitting on a bench overlooking the lake that night, I watched the reflection of the city lights dance on the water. I thought about the decisions we make, the people we love, and the choices that hurt. And then I realized something profound. Life isn't about clinging to what is gone. It's about embracing what remains. It's about learning from pain without letting it consume you. Elena had made her choice. Marco had reappeared. and I had made mine. I smiled to myself. This trip had opened my eyes, not to the betrayal, but to the truth. Happiness is a choice, and I was ready to choose it for myself. A letter I didn't send. That night, in the quiet of my hotel room, I wrote a letter, not to Elena, not to Marco, but to myself. Dear Adrian, you are stronger than you realize. The world is bigger than betrayal, more beautiful than heartbreak, and full of opportunities you can't see when you're chained to someone else's decisions. Trust yourself. Choose yourself. Embrace this life. It's yours to live. I didn't send it. I didn't need to. Writing it was enough. The closing day in Lucerne. On the final day of my stay, I walked along the lake one last time. Snowflakes drifted lightly on the water, and the mountains stood like silent witnesses to my transformation. I felt a peace I hadn't known for months, a quiet, unshakable strength. The betrayal that had once consumed me now felt like a lesson, a necessary step in becoming who I was meant to be. Elena had chosen Marco. I had chosen myself. And in that choice, I had discovered something far more important than love: resilience, clarity, and freedom. As I boarded the train to my next destination, I took one last look at the shimmering lake, feeling gratitude instead of anger, acceptance instead of pain, and hope instead of despair. This trip, my trip, had opened my eyes, and I would never forget what it had taught me. The flight back from Switzerland was quiet, the hum of the engines filling the cabin. I stared out of the window, watching the clouds drift beneath me, and thought about the past week. The solitude, the mountains, the lakes, the people I had met. Every step of that journey had been a revelation. Every photograph I had taken, every journal entry I had written, every moment of silence had reminded me of a truth I could no longer ignore. The life I had before betrayal was gone, and I would not return to it. Elena Kovacs had made her choice, and I had made mine. My heart was no longer tied to a marriage built on illusions and half-truths. My happiness was no longer dependent on someone who had already walked away emotionally. The world beyond betrayal was vast, and I was ready to explore it. Returning to familiar streets, feeling changed. Landing in my city felt different than it had before. Streets I had known for years suddenly seemed smaller, quieter, almost stifling compared to the Alps and lakes I had left behind. Every corner of my apartment reminded me of Elena, of the life we had planned, and the trip we were supposed to take together. I walked through the front door with my suitcase, feeling a strange mixture of nostalgia and liberation. The apartment smelled faintly of her perfume, but it no longer held power over me. I was here, but I wasn't the same man who had left a week ago. I was Adrian Muller, stronger, wiser, and free, confronting the truth one last time. Elena was waiting when I arrived. She had probably anticipated my return, expecting an apology, a desperate attempt to reconcile, or even an explanation for my absence. But I had none to give. Adrian, she started, her voice trembling. I raised a hand gently. Elena, don't. Her eyes widened, searching mine for some sign of the man she had known. But the man standing before her was no longer the same. He had been tested by betrayal, tempered by solitude, and strengthened by choice. I'm not here to argue, I said. I'm not here to beg. I'm here to tell you, this life we had, it's over. And I won't be returning to it. She looked down, her face pale. But we can work this out. I shook my head slowly. No, Elena. You made your choice. I made mine. I've learned that happiness isn't about clinging to someone else's indecision. It's about choosing yourself, even when it's hard. The final goodbye. We didn't embrace. We didn't cry. We didn't even raise our voices. It was a quiet, firm goodbye, one that carried more weight than any argument could. I walked to the door with my coat on, paused for a moment, and looked back. Goodbye, Elena, I said softly. I hope you find what you're looking for. And with that, I stepped out, leaving behind the life I had built with her, the memories we had created, and the illusions I had once believed in. Rebuilding from the ruins. For the first few days after my return, I immersed myself in work, friends, and the little joys of life I had neglected for too long. I visited the cafes I had loved, walked along familiar streets, and began reconnecting with parts of myself that had been dormant for months. Every photograph I had taken in Switzerland reminded me of one thing. Life continues, beauty remains, and freedom is worth more than any betrayal endured. The mountains had taught me resilience. The lakes had shown me reflection. The people I met had reminded me of connection and kindness. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to rebuild my life. Not around anyone else, but around me. The unexpected lesson. It's strange how betrayal can teach more than love ever could. I had spent years investing my heart, planning my life with Elena, imagining a future that now seemed like a dream. But the moment she chose Marco Bianchi over me, something shifted. Painful as it was, it gave me clarity. It revealed my boundaries, my values, and my strength. It showed me that a life without compromise on my self-respect is not only possible, but necessary. I realized that sometimes the greatest love story you can write is the one you live with yourself. A life chosen for me, finally. Weeks after returning, I stood on my apartment balcony, looking at the city lights. The air was cold, but my heart felt warm. I thought of Switzerland, of snow-tipped mountains, and the quiet moments where I had learned to stand alone. I realized something crucial. I had survived betrayal, heartbreak, and the collapse of the life I had imagined. And I had emerged not broken, but whole. The trip, the solitude, the reflection, they had opened my eyes to the possibility of a life chosen entirely for myself. I wouldn't wait for Elena. I wouldn't linger in the past. I wouldn't let another person's choices define my happiness. The freedom of letting go. Freedom isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or speeches. Freedom is quiet. It's the calm certainty that you no longer need anyone else's approval to live fully. It's the ability to wake up every day knowing that your life is yours to shape. And that's exactly what I felt now. Every morning, every moment, every breath. I had chosen freedom over familiarity, clarity over confusion, and myself over anyone who had walked away. The new beginning. As the weeks turned into months, I began to embrace opportunities one had once ignored. I traveled again, met new people, pursued passions I had set aside, and let my heart heal naturally. The memory of Elena and Marco remained, but it no longer controlled me. It was a chapter, not the story. I realized finally that life isn't about returning to the old version of yourself. It's about becoming the person you were always meant to be. And in that truth, I found peace. I would never go back to the life I had with Elena. I would never dwell on the betrayal. I would never allow anyone else to dictate my happiness again. This was my life, my journey, my freedom. And for the first time in years, I was excited about the future.